Well, I want to start today just telling you a little bit about Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus is telling his disciples and the crowd that they don't need to worry about what they're going to wear or what they're going to eat. He says that the flowers and the birds, they don't worry about these things. That the Father takes care of them. So why are we worrying about these things? And the thing that Jesus is trying to get to is that we need to, as people, to stop living in the past and to stop living in the present. Now, that doesn't mean you don't reflect on the past, but our worries and anxieties can't be mixed up in what we have done or haven't done, and our worries and anxieties can't be mixed up in what is to come. We need to be in the present. And in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 33, Jesus says in this context, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." I love that. Like, tomorrow will worry about itself. Tomorrow itself is personified. It has the ability to worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. So Jesus is trying to say, hey, you need to live in the present. And if you kind of follow Jesus's way of talking, you realize that he's always trying to get people to live in the present and to be aware of the present. Right? And what he says is that the things that we tend to worry about, if we're in the present and if we are focused on what God is focused on his kingdom, right? All those things will be added to us. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to get all the clothing you need and you're not going to get all the food you need. Like, that's not what he's saying, but he's saying that God will provide for you when you begin to seek his kingdom. But the reality is that as we begin to wrestle, even with our present day and the situations that we're faced with, when we are wrestling with our anxiety, what happens is that you and I end up in crisis moments, in moments of anxiety, where we feel foolish, where it seems that when people want answers from us, we don't have answers. When we are, I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you just feel like a deer in the headlights when people are talking or people expect something from you, or even when you're trying to deal with your own internal workings in life, like you just feel foolish because you mean to do one thing and you do another. A lot of times in our anxiety, we end up feeling foolish. And if we don't feel foolish, another thing that we end up wrestling with in our anxieties is that we often feel weak, right? And what I mean by weak is that we tend to feel like we can't resist things. Like we can't resist the words of people. So we want to forget what our mother told us when we were 5 about who we were, or our friend or the neighbor. We want to forget those words, but we can't forget those words. They just seem to shape us and shape us and shape us, right? Or we want to like kind of not be caught up in the value systems of the world, and yet they shape us. We get up in the morning and we wonder what people are going to think about the way we look or the things that we've said to them. Like we feel like we can't resist. So we either feel foolish or we feel weak, or in moments of anxiety, we tend to feel helpless, right? And when I think about helpless, it's not like weak and it's not like foolish. It's like nobody will listen to us. We think we have something important to say, or we think that maybe there's some good things that we can say, but no one cares about what we say. We have no impact in the world, right? So often when you and I meet a crisis, and here's the thing about crises, sometimes the crisis is, what are you going to eat for breakfast, right? Other times the crisis is, what are you going to do with your husband? Other times the crisis is, how can I handle my anger because it takes control of me? In all of those situations, we can end up experiencing foolishness and feeling foolish and weakness and not feeling like we can actually speak things into existence. Right? Well, that's not far from a very powerful man who has a similar experience, right? There's this guy named Nebuchadnezzar. We've read a little bit about him, but Nebuchadnezzar was the ruler of Babylon. And Babylon was, if Syria, in world history, Assyria was the first world power, Babylon was the second world power. They defeated Assyria. And Nebuchadnezzar is the most powerful man at the time. And we pick up his story in chapter 2 of Daniel. And it says this: in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, in his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. It's interesting that no matter how powerful you are and how much stuff you have, you can't get yourself to sleep, right? Like those things are not the perfect melatonin. Right? Those things just don't work that way. And so here is the most powerful man in the world, troubled by his own dreams, right? And trying to figure out what they mean. And probably when you have lots of responsibility, you begin to think like that your dreams mean something, right? Because stress produces very vivid dreams, right? The more stressed you are, the more vivid your dreams often are. And then you begin to think that they're telling you something. And so Nebuchadnezzar has some access to things that you and I don't have. I guess he didn't have the internet. Maybe we could type in our dream in the internet. Somebody, I don't know. There's an app for interpreting your dream. Type it in. They'll tell you what it is. But Nebuchadnezzar's like, well, I have magicians and I have, astrologers, so I'm going to call them all in. But he doesn't bother in calling the lowly ones. He just calls in the major, hitters, not the tarot card readers in the back street. Like he's getting the big guys. They all come in. And he says, I had a dream, and I need an interpretation. And like smart con artists, they say, so tell us the dream. But he's so worried about it. He has so much feelings of out of control that he's like, no, I actually need a real interpretation, and I'm not stupid. So you're going to tell me the dream. And they're like, no. We can't do that. No king has ever asked us for such a thing. Because only the gods know your dream, and they don't share their minds with us because they don't walk amongst us, right? And he's like, no, you're going to tell me the dream. And they say, no, we can't do that. And he says, fine, then I'm going to kill all of you because what good are you, right? Now think about this. When you and I feel foolish and we feel weak and we feel helpless in things, we do stupid things. Now, Nebuchadnezzar has the power to do really stupid things. So he decides that he's going to kill all of them, and they start freaking out. Now, I've noticed this in Old Testament characters, and I suspect it's true of us as humans, but they do just drastic things when things get desperate. So he decides to kill all of them, even though some of them don't even know what's going on. So we pick up our story in verse 17. It says, then Daniel, or actually verse 14, when, I don't know how to say his name, but Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel. Now, let's pause there. If you didn't know, we're in the Daniel Project. We're going through the book of Daniel, chapter by chapter, and kind of wrestling with the ideas. Now, Daniel is in the Old Testament. The Bible is divided into two parts. We have the New Testament, which is the second part, and the Old Testament, which is the first part. The Old Testament, without me kind of giving you a long description, is the story of this people of God called Israel. Israel, if you want to imagine in the sense of reading the whole Bible, you could imagine Israel is the church in the Old Testament. And so we are studying the church as a entire body's relationship to God, only they're an actual nation. Well, right now, when we pick up Daniel, which is near the end of Israel's story before Jesus shows up, everybody's in exile. You see, Babylon has taken over Jerusalem, has destroyed Israel, basically. There is no Israel. Yeah, there's a few Israelites, and they're, putzing around in Jerusalem, but there's not really any Israel anymore. They're in exile. And Babylon has taken its greatest nobles and its best-looking men, and it has tried to make them Babylonian. Okay? So, if the Old Testament is Israel's story, and they're in a desperate place, the New Testament is the story of Jesus and the church. The story of God becoming man and rescuing humanity and beginning the age of the church, you and me, us. And so it's the story of that. Daniel helps us understand how to be the church. So we get into Daniel's story. They show up, and it says, Daniel spoke, and this is to the guard, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. So, as we've been studying Daniel, there's some themes that have come out. Last week, one of the big themes is that God was inviting us to take risks, to risk for him, to step into scary situations. But overall, what chapter 1 has kind of given us a sense of is that when you and I are willing to live in the present, not in the past and not in the future, God begins to open doors for us to step through. God is about things, even when we're in exile, even when things seem bad and horrible, when our life is kind of falling in around us or around our friends, doors are opening if we're willing to live into the present of things and take risks. So, most of the time when we face crisis like Daniel, a severe crisis where he's about to die, Daniel probably experiences all the same things you and I experience. He feels foolish, like he doesn't know what's going on. He's probably feeling weak, like it's Daniel against all of Babylon. And he probably thinks, my words don't have any impact. And yet the text says that he had wisdom and tact. Now, wisdom is seeing things the way God sees them. So Daniel first says, I have to figure these things out. He acts in wisdom. But the second thing he does is he acts with authority. He steps right into the throne room. He wasn't invited there. He says, hey, I need some time. I can figure this out. He stepped in with authority. So he acted with wisdom. He stepped in with authority. And somehow he thinks he has power. Right? He thinks that he's not weak, that he has power. He said, give me time to interpret your dream. Do you see the assumptions that he figures it out? He thinks he has the authority, and he assumes that he's going to have the power to interpret the dreams. Now, yeah, we learned from chapter 1 that he can interpret dreams, but he's assuming that he can figure out what this guy's dream is. Now, why is it that Daniel can do this? Well, the text kind of explains that to us. So then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning the mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. So the first thing that Daniel believes, and this is something that we got to hold on to, is that in chapter 1, verse 2, it says that God gave Nebuchadnezzar the throne, and God gave him Judah. He didn't get it himself. So Daniel is already always operating on the fact that whoever is in power is not the one who's dictating things. The one that's in power is God. So he's operating from that first. But the second thing is that Daniel operates from the idea that he is not by himself. Right? You will see this over and over, that he's not by himself. What does he do? He goes home and he gets with his bros, and you'll see this is a bromance between these guys, like it's in this story. But anyway, like he goes to them and he says, we need to pray for mercy so that God might reveal the dream. Now here's the thing that's unique to Daniel that's different than the Babylonians. So when the Babylonian astrologers are there to interpret the dream, their understanding of the gods is that they do not reveal their mind to man. But what Daniel understands is that God can pour out his mercy, which is his endless love, just like an unstoppable love on them, and reveal what he's thinking. right? So he operates on the fact that he's not alone and that the God of the heavens actually is concerned and wants an intimate relationship, and when asked, reveals things. Right? He's operating on these things. The Babylonians are operating on something different. Right? So what's so transformative for Daniel in all of this is that he actually believes that God is involved. What gives Daniel the capacity to act in wisdom and authority and power is that he believes that God is involved. That when you step through the door, when you take the opportunities in front of you to see God act, when you risk, God likes showing up. He likes being part of it. He will reveal things to you. Right? Now, they may not always be the things you wanted him to reveal, but he will not withhold. Right? He will not withhold. So, he does reveal it, and Daniel offers a prayer, and this prayer kind of emphasizes all the things that we've already said. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and disposes them. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, O God of my Father. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what he asks of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. One, Daniel says, look, God possesses power, God possesses wisdom, and inherently God possesses authority. Right? And so God gives these things, and God reveals these things. And God is the one who's in control of the seasons, and God is the one who's in control of the Nebuchadnezzars and the Dariuses and all the other people. God's in control. Daniel is able to have courage in the context of wisdom, authority, and power because he believes God is in control, and he keeps repeating that over and over. When you and I experience this sense of feeling foolish, and I know all of you can think of that moment. We're all humans. We have those moments where people, we feel, that's the way of thinking is we feel exposed. We feel foolish, right, about something about us. Or we feel like we're just powerless, we're weak. Or we don't have a voice, we don't have any authority. When we feel that way, the first thing I would invite you to do is stand shoulder to shoulder with Daniel, an ancient, basically prophet and exile, who stood up against Nebuchadnezzar and invited God to intervene in his crises, right? And took risks and acted with power and authority and wisdom, not of his own, but of God's. But I don't want you just to stand shoulder to shoulder with Daniel. I want you to hear something that Paul has to say to you out of Ephesians chapter 1. I want to start in verse 15. Now, this is Paul's prayer for you. So we can stand shoulder to shoulder with Daniel, but Daniel was looking forward towards this event that Paul is talking about and praying for us. It says, for this reason, ever since I heard about your faith, that would be the Ephesians and us, in the Lord Jesus, and your love for all the saints, I have not stopped giving thanks for you, remembering you in my prayers. I keep asking the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, so the King, the Father of the King, the glorious Father, may give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation so that you may know him better. I want you to understand something. The reason that Daniel can step into the throne room, and the reason that he can act on wisdom and with power and with an expectation of revelation isn't because he's looking to get all of these things, but he has an intimate relationship with God. And where does the intimate relationship with God come from? When wisdom and revelation are given to you. Right? It's not the hope and for God to reveal things to you about your life, about how it is that you're going to deal with your kids or the chaos of your mind or the situations that you're just like this, that there seems to be no answer, is not to get them fixed. To pray for revelation and for wisdom about them is because you hope to step a little closer into intimacy with God. You hope that the God of mercy is going to step closer to you so that when you operate in this world, you have a confidence. Now, that's what Paul is hoping for, because listen to what he says in verse 18. I pray also that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in the saints. What he wants is for you to open up your eyes and look around you and understand that this here is your inheritance. Right? When we talk about, God is coming back and he's going to make things all new and we won't have to deal with sin, but really that's not your inheritance. Your inheritance is that these people are the people who will walk with you now and forevermore. This is your inheritance. David Sommitz is your inheritance, right? Right there. This man, he's your inheritance. From now on, he symbolizes our inheritance forever and evermore. Right? But this is important for you to understand. Like, what Paul wants to be revealed is that we are each other's inheritance. That the church is the inheritance. That we are called together to something. And his incomparable great power for us who believe. That power is like the work of his mighty strength, which exerted in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms. For above all rule and authority, power and dominion, and every title that has been given not only in the present age, but also the age to come. And God placed all things under his feet and appointed him to be head over everything for the church, which is the body, the fullness of him who fills everything in every way. Here's what I want to argue to you. The church is filled by God. You want personal fulfillment? It comes from being part of God's community, not you necessarily trying to find some intimate fulfillment from a personal relationship with Jesus. That exists. But fulfillment comes from here. Authority and power comes from the Spirit here. God's Spirit poured on his church. That's where you get authority. That's where you get power. That's where you get wisdom. It's understanding that when you step into certain crises in your life, from what you have to eat, to how you're going to deal with your boyfriend, to what you're going to do for college, to all those things, you have authority and power and wisdom because you're here. Because this, God's community, his Spirit poured out on it, the fullness of it. The power that God exerted to raise Christ from the grave is the power that exists within his church. And you're going to see this play out in the rest of the chapter of Daniel. But when you begin to feel foolish in a situation, you have to know that you have the wisdom of God because you have the Spirit of God which was poured out on his church as much as it was poured out on you individually. But when you feel weak, you can say, no, I might feel weak, but God's church is not weak, and I am part of it, and I can step out in strength. When you feel like you have no authority to say anything or no one will listen to you, you can say, no. I have a voice because I belong to the kingdom of God, his church, and his church has a voice that cannot be destroyed because Jesus rules over all things, and the title of king is both for him now and into the future. Now, Daniel has been given the dream. And so Daniel walks into the throne room of the king and he says, look, man, I didn't get this. In fact, you will note, I will show you, he says we a lot of times. It's not like God revealed the dream to Daniel. Even if Daniel was just the one to get the dream, Daniel's friends poured their hearts out for an evening together and God shed his mercy on them. And Daniel understands that it's not just him who heard the dream. And so Daniel tells him the dream. And because there's a lot of text here, and every time I've worked in this sermon, it's gone almost 50 minutes, I'm going to jump a bunch of the text and just tell you, and then we'll talk about the interpretation. I'll read that to you. So, his dream started out like this. It's a statue. And the head of the statue is gold. Right? And then the middle part of the statue is silver. And then the next part of the statue, this waist area, is bronze. And then below that, it's iron. And his feet have iron and clay mixed together. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a big old rock comes and boom, it hits the statue. And the statue disintegrates and the wind just blows its pieces away. And then that rock turns into a mountain that dominates the earth. Now, let's just listen to how Daniel interprets all of that. Starts in verse 36. This was the dream, and I love this, and now we will interpret it to the king. I don't know if they just took turns. Daniel said something. I don't know how that works. But anyway, we will interpret it. You, O king, are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head, that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will rise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and the toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom, yet it will have some strength of iron in it. Even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings, the revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery." Then the king placed Daniel in the high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all the wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, with Daniel himself remaining in the royal court. So Daniel didn't leave his friends behind. He gave them rule over the province of Babylon. So, I spent a long time, well, probably more time than I should, trying to figure out all of the perspectives in, church history on this statue. From the Jewish people to my memories from being a kid to reading a bunch of stuff. And there are a lot of interpretations of it. It's one we know for pretty sure, because it's in the Bible, is that Nebuchadnezzar is the gold head. We definitely know that. Then most people think, as we look back at history, that the Medes are the silver. Persians and the Medes. They come along next. They're the next world power. And then you have the Greeks. And then that iron, most likely, is the Romans. Now, we don't know if that iron that then pours down into the clay is just a representation of how powerful Rome was, and but it ended up dividing because it did kill everybody and was the biggest empire ever, and yet it kind of disintegrated internally. We don't know. Some people think the feet with the clay and the iron are another kingdom that has yet to come. Some believe it is the Muslim community that is that. Nobody knows. But where I stand is I just believe it's the Romans. Because here's the important part of it. A rock comes. And a rock crushes the statue. And then it grows into a mountain. And it's not a rock that was another kingdom. It's a rock that was hewn by God. Because the rock is Jesus. Right? Now, in Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, Jesus says something interesting to Peter. He says, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. The church is the rock. Right? The church is the rock. And the church destroys the statue. And not even hell can destroy it, because the church is not a kingdom that is a human kingdom. The church is a kingdom started by Jesus. Right? And a church is a kingdom that when we bind something on earth, it's bound in heaven. Right? So, Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar, and there are a lot of other interpretations, but Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar that a kingdom is coming, that is going to destroy all human kingdoms, and is never going to be removed. And nothing, including hell, can stop it. Now, if you belong to that, and you are standing at the refrigerator and feeling foolish, and you belong to the rock, you should be able to make a decision about dinner. It shouldn't be too hard, right? No, on a more serious sense. When you and I sit in places where we feel foolish, where we feel without power, when we feel like we don't have voice, which I would argue is at least happens 10 to 30 times a week, right? At least in my life, if I'm honest, there are so many instances where in my job, I sit across from you guys going, I feel foolish. I don't know what to do, right? As we wrestle with our struggles in life. I hear the things that you wrestle with. I know you feel at times foolish and powerless and without voice. Here's what I want to invite you to think about. What would it be like as you face those if you could grab hold of the idea that you belong to the most powerful kingdom ever to be built, and one that cannot even be destroyed by the most mystical and evil powers of darkness? Would it change the way you make decisions? Would it change the way you act? I think it would change the way I act if I truly understood how much power God has given me, and how much authority God has given me, and how much wisdom He's willing to pour out for me. But the question becomes like, oh, that's great, but how do I get that? How do I access those things? Well, Paul and Daniel offer us a very simple way. Number one, both of them understand that they're not alone. The only way that we can access those things is together. You and I cannot do it by ourselves. Why the church is so powerful is that we do life together. But what does Daniel do in the moment of crisis? He figures things out. He figures out what's going on. He's wise. But he goes back to his friends and he prays. He asks for wisdom and revelation. What does Paul begin to pray for as soon as he hears the faith of the Ephesians? That they might have revelation. That they might have their eyes opened. What's the prayer that Daniel prays? He says, you know everything that is in the dark, and you are of light. God finds joy in revealing, but God likes relationship. He wants you to ask. He wants you to get on your knees and say, pour out your mercy on us. Reveal what we must do. Because what happens then, as you and I build that rhythm into our life, when we face things, we've built an intimacy with God, and so that these things become reflexive. So like Daniel, when we see a crisis, we step in and say, what's going on? We walk into the throne room like we have a right to be there, even though we might not. We say we can deal with this, even though we're probably sure we can't. Because we have an intimacy with God at a level where we know He will show up, because we have story after story after story of Him showing up. Right? So what would it be like in your life if you could really take hold of God's wisdom and his power and his authority in your life, how would your life change? How would it change? I think we started a little bit late today because we're the village. So I have a few minutes, but probably only 2 or 3. So if anybody has any responses or thoughts, Kevin, the mic is, well, there you go. I don't know if it's on. Is the mic on? Okay.
I just look at the way that God reveals so powerfully to Daniel this truth that no one in the world, or at least in the known world, was able to reveal. And he comes in word for word, gives all these details. And at that, Nebuchadnezzar goes, wow, like this is really compelling evidence. Obviously, you're with God, and laid on the ground before him. And that's great. How do we access that today? Or I guess I feel like when we are rubbing shoulders with the powers of the world, I don't often experience that, where I've been given something that so clearly reveals that God is with me, so as to convince others in power that, hey, like you do have this power, and I'm going to listen to you. So where are those moments or those places, I guess, in today's day and age?
Well, I guess my answer would be, I think you'd be surprised. You may not have a Nebuchadnezzar moment when somebody actually bows before you and like gives you a whole bunch of, the ruling power of all of, Arizona. That may not happen, but I think you would be surprised at how many times when you have stepped forward, God has begun to work that way in other people's lives. They may not tell you those things, but I think they happen.
I think not to jump the gun, but also Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the next chapter, their response is, "We will not bow, and even if God does not save us, we will not bow."
Right. One in the back there. Oh, sorry.
I'm just thinking about some people in my life who are Christians, and they are like a bit like really into this kind of ideology or this theology, and they just think that they have this thing that when they say it, I'm like, that sounds like the devil. But they really think it's Jesus, and they think it's God. They think that this wisdom that they have is like, and so like, I guess this becomes a little bit edgy, this like talking about this, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this could encourage somebody in that. But I think what you would say is that it has to be in community, and that it has to be. So anyway, I think I answered my own question, but Any thoughts on that?
Well, no, I would agree with you that particular, and I don't want to get too far on its train, but that particular theology is very centered in the individual and not in the community itself and the community's voice. I mean, you get your authority in all of these areas because you've grown in intimacy together, seeking his face together. And so then you could... Well, I would say that I would go through Daniel and find a little bit out of why they understand that. Say, can I have some time? Go pray and ask God to reveal how you might talk to them, and ask those people around you to do that if it's something that has to be encountered. Anybody else? Thoughts, questions? Oh, we got a couple up here. And then I'm going to...
Do you think an individual needs to be physically a part of the church body to have power and authority poured on them?
Yes and no. And that I think it is really easy to go astray because power and authority comes from the church itself, and the Spirit falling both on the individual and the community. But at the same time, God calls people on missions where they're by themselves often. And in that, God pours out his authority on that person. They may not have immediate community around them. But I think it's hard. I don't think it's black and white. That's what I'll say. Yes. And then we got...
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say with Danielle, like with your question, it's interesting that God didn't call all 4 of them to speak to Nebuchadnezzar. Some of the people were there to pray, and Daniel specifically was given the opportunity to speak.
Yeah. I think David and then Russ, and then we need to close it.
This might be an obvious question, but I think it's helpful for us to dwell on the difference between Jesus' invitation to not worry about tomorrow,
Right.
and the attitude, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die.
Right.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the difference between those attitudes?
Right. Well, I think he clarifies that in that the attitude in when we're not worrying about tomorrow and the past is that we are seeking the kingdom. Eating and being merry for tomorrow we die is not a kingdom value. And so I think that would be my answer to that. Russ?
Responding to Karina, like you say, it's not black and white, but God does command us to be part of a body that He's put us in.
Yes.
And the implicit claim that people make all the time is, well, I've got this perfectly good, straight with God relationship, and I don't need to be in community. Well, if God commanded you to be in community and you're not there, then that's a sin issue that's in your life, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're not a Christian. It doesn't mean you don't necessarily have some walk with God that's beautiful in some real ways, but you're in rebellion because you haven't entered into it.
Right.
So it's a thing that's important.
Yeah. Well, and I think we'll close with that, but I'll answer that. I don't know if any of you have seen that advertisement. I mean, the auto insurance do these commercials all the time, but they had one where this Asian woman is doing weights, and she's got like this gigantic arm because she's just working out this arm, and then she has this tiny arm over here because she hasn't kind of equally worked things out. And I would argue that when you move yourself away from community, it's not that you lose authority and power of the Spirit of God, but you may have worked this arm so much that because you need community to say, oh, that looks weird. Like, that's really weird looking. So, like, I think that's part of what is answer that question. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this community. I just ask that you would help us to connect to you and to your wisdom and revelation, and that you would give us courage in those moments when we feel foolish to stand in your wisdom, and the moments when we feel powerless to walk in your power, and when we feel helpless to speak with your authority, that we would remember that and begin to ask for you to pour that out on us with our community. And I ask that in your holy name.